My grandmother spent a great many days worried about her children. Much of her last few years, she was significantly worried about safety and security of her eldest daughter, who was very ill, her eldest son, who had recently been widowed, her middle child, who seemed to suffer a great deal of turbulence in her environment, her youngest daughter, who is physically handicapped, and her youngest son, who he always tried to do the right thing. So my grandmother died of cancer, but many of us in the family came to see that a part of her died when her partner died, when my grandfather died a few years earlier, and just a few years prior to that, she had lost her younger sister, her best friend. This isn't to say that my grandmother was lonely. Excuse me, I can't speak for my grandmother. This isn't to say that my grandmother was alone and wasn't surrounded by people whom she cared for their entire lives, including me, her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, brothers, sisters still remaining. But she's also someone whom I have seen deal with a great deal of loss. Now, I should preface this by saying that I think so deeply about my grandmother because we have had so many good times together, including the very last days of her life. So what I'm about to say to you is not just coming from my own sense of loss of my grandmother or even a sense of sadness, but because I also want to explore that side of her, and that was loss. I saw her bury her mother. I don't remember her burying her father. I was too young to remember, although I vaguely remember going to great-granddaddy's funeral. But it was seeing her bury her mother that really taught and characterized for me empathy. My grandmother and her younger sister went down to live with their mother. They lived a few states away. During the last days of her life, my great-grandmother died of pneumonia, was very ill in what felt like a long time, but I think amounted to just the last months of her life. I had never seen my grandmother away from her family, away from her married family. And so it was interesting to watch two women who would literally have to bathe their mother, take care of their mother's every need, and to see that what dignity they did that with. They were giving her a dignified death. They were giving their old mother. They were, putting their own feelings aside, in a sense, as daughters, and their sense of loss over losing their mother. But in that time, they were giving their mother comfort in her last days. The comfort of human touch. She wasn't just taken care of by cold hands with gloves, but by very soft and gentle hands. My grandmother's hands, I don't know how, but because my grandmother farmed and she knew how to hoe with a hoe. Keep her hand to the plow, as it were. Keep our hands to a different kind of hoe than the ones we see today. But she really, truly had a huge garden and had grown up picking cotton and hated it because, it just pricked her hands. But she had extremely soft hands. So I can only begin to imagine what it must have felt like for my great-grandmother to feel those hands doing things for her, cooking foods in the ways that they know that she liked them, and they knew better than anybody how she liked her food to be cooked. laughing with her, talking with her, remembering people they had known. I mean, they shared more than 60 years. Well, at that time, yeah, more than 60 years together. My grandmother, her sister, and their mother. But those last days. Now, on the other side, I've also seen my grandmother with children. Anybody's children. You bring a child around my grandmother, and that child is gonna get a hug. And so I also think deeply about the conflicts around us today. On a very, I could talk on a very intimate level, some of the very nasty comments that, or just very nasty kind of discussions that I might have with some of the people who comment on some of my videos. And how they bother me so, because they bother me in the sense that I continue to engage in dialogue with people who simply, A, don't want to hear what I have to say, and B, seem so unempathetic that the way that people speak to me, speak to each other, I just think to myself, I wouldn't speak to another woman's child like that. You're somebody, watching this video, you typing comments, you're somebody else's child. And equally, when I say look at the conflicts today, both intimately and politically, I can't help but think about Israel and Palestine and this ongoing war. And I think I don't just think about the carnage and all of that, but I guess my point of empathy in that situation arises when I really look at, and I'm concerned about how those mothers live through so much worry about their children for so long. I mean, that's a conflict that's been going on since Israel has been in existence. And on all sides of that equation, I think about mothers who are in constant worry about the safety and security of their children. Are they going to come home at the end of the day? Women on either side of those conflicts must be wondering. And so this is where this story began, with my grandmother worrying about her children. And the very simple ways, simple ways that we suffer in our everyday lives. Just as I've seen my grandmother suffer, she equally taught me how to put your own suffering aside, and why it's important. Because you cannot express care for another unless you can truly see from their perspective and feel from their perspective. Recognize that they're human, effectively, is what I'm saying. But it's so intimate, what I'm saying. It's not that I have some Buddhist philosophical rhetoric behind what I'm saying. I do. But I would just want to bring that to you, this idea of suffering, and the resolve to it is empathy. Are you really able to recognize the humanness in another, and therefore, as I explained, in yourself? This long, just how look at the mothers around you.